So this morning we're going to begin a series, and I've got to be honest with you, I'm supposed to have this really cool title for it and this really cool slide and all this stuff. Lisa, how long did I go back and forth 14 different ways with what it should be? Guys, I can't put it in a box, which is really one of the titles, which is God in a Box. And I can't put it in a box to narrow it down to what this cool, catchy title should be that's supposed to drive us all to Phooey. Phooey. Maybe that'll be the title of the sermon series. Phooey. The fact is, the message doesn't change, does it? So I want to give you a brief insight into my week and into the story and into what we're talking about today. Looked last week and I've been feeling just this we need more of God, remember? We've talked about it. We know it. We've discussed it with worship. We've discussed it. We need more of God. What's that look like? What's that sound like? What's that feel like? What's that mean? And so I began to go through, and I began to look, and I began to say, God, what do you want to do? And I was going a different direction, and then Tuesday, I just felt like God just popped into my heart again. This is what we're talking about. And I'm like, God, it feels condemning, and I don't want to do that. And then we got to Thursday night and Elevate, and this is why Elevate is so cool, is because we never know what God's going to do on a Thursday night, right? And a couple of us braved the snow and the ice and close to death to be here on Thursday night. My goodness, it was bad. I wasn't expecting that at all. And all of a sudden, we began to talk and share about how we need an encounter with God. And God's just like, bing, 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 bing. That's what I've been saying to you. And I'm like, God, do you ever get that way with God where you want to go your way, but God wants you to go his way, and there's like this tug of war that's back and forth? Do you ever get that way? And now you have a choice. Now you're either going to go your way or you're going to go God's way. And when you go your way, you know it's not going to work out, and you know it's just hard going. And when you go God's way, things seem to be easier. So, began to work and to write a message for this week, and it felt like no matter what happened, there was so much. Lisa and I talked about it, and I said, honey, I don't know why I'm struggling with this one. I feel like it's just not coming together. And so, whenever I feel that way, I always go back and I say, God, what are you trying to say? You see, I was trying to come up with this really cool, catchy way with a 4-point sermon about culture and about history and about problems and about who we are and all this stuff about why it relates to God. In fact, we were going to look at a story out of John chapter 4. And in John chapter 4, there's a story about a woman that Jesus meets at a well. It's in a place called Samaria. Now, Samaritans and Jews, if you know anything about ancient history, Samaritans and Jews didn't get along real well together. Samaritans, in the eyes of a Jew, were half-breeds. They weren't real Jews, and they kind of sort of worshipped God, but they didn't. The Samaritans and the Jews didn't get along. Think race relations in 1960. That's the Samaritans and the Jews, okay? Think the Shia and Sunni Muslims. That's the Samaritans and the Jews. They hated each other. Jesus sits down next to a Samaritan woman and says, hey, can I have a drink? She says, what can I have a drink? You can't ask me for a drink. I'm a Samaritan, you're a Jew. We don't do this. Jesus said, if you knew who I was, if you had any idea who I was, you'd be asking me for water. She said, what are you talking about? Are you better than my forefather Abraham? Than our forefather Jacob who dug this well that you're asking me for a drink from? What? Jesus, you are off your rocker. She didn't know his name was Jesus yet. You're off your rocker. You're crazy. You're out of your mind. And he said, I have water that you don't even know about, that you will never be thirsty again if you drink this water from me. And now she's intrigued, right? It's like the ShamWow on a TV commercial. It's like the must-see TV. You're like, how in the world does this really happen? I've got to get it because I'm not sure if it's really going to work or if it's just a magic trick that they're doing on TV. Have you guys ever bought a paid-for TV product just because you wanted to see if it was really going to work the way they said it would? She's looking at Jesus and she's like, you've got living water? All right, I'm in. Let me hear about it. You're either crazy or you're real. I have no idea which one, but go for it, Jesus. This whole time, Jesus is trying to lead her to something, and she just doesn't get it. This whole time, Jesus is trying to lead her to something, and she's on this roadblock. She's like, this is the reason I can't, this is the reason I can't, this is the reason I can't, this is the reason I can't. Jesus finally says to her, go, and go get your husband. She said, I don't have a husband. And he looked at her and said, yeah, you're right. You've had 5, and the one you're with now isn't your husband either. Now, how would you feel if you sat down next to a perfect stranger and he just read your mail? You sat down next to a perfect stranger and he's talking all this stuff and you're like, what are you talking about? Living water? I don't get it. And all of a sudden he said, you've never seen him before. You have no idea who he is. And he's like, yeah, you've had 5 husbands. I know everything you did in your past. I know what you did last summer. Right? Now she stops and she listens and she goes, man, you're a prophet, but you're still not supposed to be here. Who are you? Jesus said to her, I am the very one that you've been searching for. I'm the Messiah that everyone has been talking about. See, all of this led up to one thing. It led up to an encounter with God. Everything that God was doing, everything that Jesus was doing, it wasn't just to get the Samaritan woman to give him a drink. It was because he wanted to have a life-changing encounter with her. He wanted her life to be changed, and he knew the way to do it was for her to encounter who God really was. This church, from the very beginning, has been built on the verse and the idea that an encounter with God will change someone's life. How many of you guys believe that? An encounter with God, meeting with God, will change someone's life. Here's where I was going to get really cool. You ready? I've got this box. And unfortunately, the lights didn't work quite the way I wanted them to. But I've got this box that what? I've got this box that it's like God in a box. Because that's really what the Samaritan woman was wanting to do, wasn't she? She was wanting to take God and she was wanting to take Jesus and say, hey, I've got my cultural expectations. Let me put up the side. I'm a Samaritan, you're a Jew. I've got my cultural idea of what this thing should look like. See, like it or not, we have a cultural understanding of what God should look like. Let me just say it this way. I grew up in a church that was 98% white in the suburbs of Cleveland. Across the parking lot, there was a church that was 98% African American. Just across the parking lot. And can I tell you that both churches worshiped the same God, but we both had a different way of doing it? You guys know what I'm talking about? Right? And they would come to our church every once in a while, and all of a sudden it was hysterical because you saw the entire church just come alive. I don't know if it was the music, I don't know if it was the way the pastor spoke, but the entire church just went, yeah! And then we would join and go over to their church, and we would sing, and our preacher would preach, and we were trying to do this thing where everybody was coming together, and they would be like, wow, that's different. Yeah! There was a cultural understanding that put God inside the box. And the problem was that if you didn't fit God inside that cultural box that you thought your church was like, well, it didn't work out so well. It was weird. The woman at the well, she looks at Jesus and she's like, I'm a Samaritan, you're a Jew. We don't do this. I've got my culture here that needs to stay where it is. She's like, I've got my history. I've got Joseph and I've got Jacob. This is Jacob as well, Jesus. Do you know who Jacob is? He's my forefather. I've got an entire history and an entire line of theology. And sometimes we take our history and we put it up as a way that we can put God in our box so that we can fit God into our understanding of who God is. Right? Sometimes we do that through our previous religious history. Oh, you go to that church? Oh, you must not know Jesus as well as I do then. Growing up, can I tell you that one of the jokes that we used to make was that all have sinned and fallen short of the assemblies of God. Because I thought that if you didn't go to my Assemblies of God church, you weren't going to heaven. I genuinely thought that way. That's how I was almost raised. Nobody said that. But that was the idea that I got. My Baptist friends, they weren't going to heaven. They didn't know Jesus. They went to the Methodist church, they didn't go to heaven. I had my history that needed to protect what I thought God was supposed to be. I had my God in a box. She begins to talk to Jesus. She says, Jesus, you just don't get it. You just don't understand. You just don't know how it's supposed to be, Jesus. You've got living water? What's living water supposed to be like? And she goes on, and Jesus begins to tell her about the living water, and she says, Jesus, listen, this is all well and good, but I'm supposed to worship on this mountain, and you're supposed to worship on that mountain, and God says this, and I don't even know about worship. We have our preconceived notions that are supposed to fit God into the box of how we're supposed to do it. Maybe your preconceived notion is that well, raising my hands, that's kind of kooky, that's kind of weird. Maybe your preconceived notion is that if somebody doesn't raise their hands, then they're not really worshiping. Maybe your preconceived notion is that speaking in tongues, well, that's kind of different. Maybe your preconceived notion is that, wow, speaking in tongues, if you don't do it, you just don't have the same relationship that I do with God. We have preconceived notions of who God is and who God's supposed to be, and we try and fit God into our little box of who we want God to be for us, of who we need God to be. So, you know why? Because it's comfortable. Because it's easier. Because it's safe. I don't know about you, I like order in my life. I don't always get it, but I like order. The other day, yesterday as a matter of fact, Micah and I were making waffles. And I love waffles. We found out yesterday that you don't want to use whole wheat waffles or whole wheat flour when you make waffles. You want to use white all-purpose flour when you make waffles because the whole wheat flour just doesn't, it adds a gritty, strange texture to your waffle that you don't really want. Anyway, we're making these waffles, and we put the batter in the middle of the waffle iron, and then what do? You squeeze it together, right? And you flip it over, and you lock the little thing, and you wait like 3 minutes for the waffle batter to cook. And it creates nice little compartments of everything that are there, and it stays into its spot, and it's supposed to be right there, and then all of a sudden, guess what happened? It started oozing out the side. You guys know what I'm talking about? You're making waffles and it starts oozing out the side and you're like, man, now I've got a mess. And the parent is me is going, kid, I told you to only put 3 in. You put 4 scoops in. Why'd you do that? And the dad in me is going, it's no big deal. We're making waffles. We're having fun. I'm going to have to clean this up later. I like things to be neat and orderly, kind of like my waffles, that they have a little individual compartment for all of my syrup. That's why the little squares are there, right? So that you can get a little bit of syrup in every single waffle square. And because it's nice and compartmentalized like my life should be, everything fits the way that it's supposed to. And then all of a sudden something happens. It starts leaking out the side and we're going, ah! Right? God is supposed to fit in my nice, neat little box of 30 minutes every morning or my car ride to work, in my prayer and in my fasting and in my worship. He's supposed to fit in my Sunday morning and in my first Thursday night of Elevate. He's supposed to fit in my little box of what I need, when I need, how I need, what's supposed to be, when it's supposed to be. And God's saying, listen, I don't fit in your box. See, what really happened was this, and this is where it was so cool because God just suddenly, I love when God just breaks the box in our lives and in our thinking. Because here I am, and I'm going through and I'm going, wow, God, there's cultural boxes, and there's historical boxes, and there's preconceived notion boxes, and there's all these things that we try and put around you to keep you in, and we just carry you around, and all of a sudden, God whispers to my heart, and he's like, yeah, but you know who you're really putting in a box? I'm like, yeah, God, you. He's like, no, you. Wait a minute, God, you're in the box that I make for you to keep you nice and compartmentalized in my life so that I can carry you where I need. I can fit you in my purse. I can put you next to my iPhone. I can just pick you. No, Josh, the one that you're compartmentalizing and putting in your box, the one that you're trapping in is you. See, here's the woman at the well, and she begins to give Jesus all of these reasons as to why she can't understand God, as to why God needs to fit in her understanding box, as to why God needs to sit in her knowledge of who he's supposed to be. And the only person that she was trapping was herself. See, Jesus looked at her and said, I want to give you living water that if you drink of it, you will never be thirsty again. And she said, great. Hold on a minute while I get my box to hold on to that for a minute. See, friends, a lot of times what we do when we say we want to encounter God, when we need to encounter God, is we say, great, God, this encounter, how exactly is this going to fit? Is it going to fill it up to here? Maybe overflowing, God? Okay, but I'll need to get a bigger box because I don't want the mess and the drip. God, how exactly is this encounter thing going to work? Right? God, what exactly does this encounter thing look like? And God's just saying, listen, an encounter with me will change your life. An encounter with me will destroy the box that you've been living in. Not that you've put me in. God can't be contained, but that you've been living in. That I've been living in. So you know what the next part of my prayer was? See, all of these conversations with God, they follow a progressive pattern. And Joy Behar might think that I'm absolutely loony bins for talking with God, but I believe that God does talk back to me. And he speaks to my heart. And I know he speaks to yours too. I said, okay, God, great. You want to break down the sides of the box, but I still need an encounter with you, God. You know the tough part about it? How do we have an encounter with God? Think about this for a minute. How do we have an encounter with God? And that was the question that God asked me, and I was like, well, every time that I look in the Bible, God, you just met the person. In Genesis, there was this guy named Jacob, maybe you've heard of him, and he was the grandson of a guy named Abraham who kind of started off the whole Jewish history. He's the grandson of Abraham, and Jacob tricked his brother Esau. Esau wanted to kill him. Jacob goes running into the desert. Jacob lays down, puts his head on a rock for a pillow, and has a dream of angels going up and down. And he says that God was in this place and I didn't even know it. He had an encounter with God that he wasn't expecting, but God knew where he was. God met him where he was at. In Isaiah chapter 6, we read that in the year that King Uzziah died, amidst social upheaval and everything else going on in the kingdom, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, and there were angels shouting, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord." And Isaiah's life is messed up for all of eternity after that. But how did it happen, God? Am I left, God, just to a random happenstance of when you want to show up in my life, you will, and that encounter will change everything, right? That's how it feels sometimes. So we're on this treasure hunt. God, am I going to find you? God, am I going to get to you? God, and how many of you know that can be exhausting and frustrating, right? And I don't think God created us or created this walk with him to be exhausting and frustrating. God, what about the woman at the well? You met her there. God, what about the man at the gate beautiful where Peter and John were walking up and they healed him and he had an encounter with you? What about all these times, God, where people met Saul on the road to Damascus? He had an encounter with you that changed everything. But God, you're the one that met him. God, what do we have to do? This is the progression in my prayer and in my thinking as I'm going through my week and preparing for today. God, that's awesome that we need an encounter with you, but God, how? See, it's one thing for us to say that we need something. It's another thing entirely for us to say, this is how we get it. And I feel like so often we know that we need God. We know that we need the Spirit. We know that but how? You ready? Back to a verse that many of us are very, very familiar with. In Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you. Plans not to harm you. Plans to give you hope. Plans to give you a future." We like that verse. Verse 10. Not so happy. Let me read the verse just in front of it. This is what the Lord says. "When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and I will fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place." You know what happened? The Israelites, the Jews actually at this point, were living their lives and they weren't following God the way that they were supposed to. And so God, in 586 BC, sent all of them away to this kingdom of Babylon. It's modern day Iraq. And God said, for 70 years you're going to live in captivity. But I'm going to set you free. For 70 years, you're going to live in captivity, but I'm going to break you out. For 70 years, you're going to live in captivity, but I'm going to break the chains that are on you. For 70 years, you're going to live in captivity, Israel, but I'm going to set you free, and I'm going to fulfill every good promise that you have. Remember, who's the captive when we try and put God in the box? We are. And God says, listen, I'm here to set you free today. I'm here to break down the walls of what you think I should be, of what you think it should look like, of how you think it should go. I'm here to destroy the box that you've created around your own heart that's keeping you from me. I'm here to destroy it all, and I have good plans for you when that happens. So how do we have this encounter with God that's supposed to change everything? Are you ready? Because I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Plans to make you the head and not the tail, above and not beneath. Plans to bless you with good things that are pressed down and running over and shaken together. I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. But as long as you're living in the box of captivity where you think you're putting me, but you're really putting yourself, I can't get those good plans to you because I can't overflow the cell that you've made for yourself. but I have good plans for you. You notice how this glass is kind of fuzzy? Does it ever feel like that's how you're looking at the plans of God in your life? That it's just kind of fuzzy? That you can kind of sort of see it, but you can't really see it? God's waiting to break down the box. Here's how. He says, then, how do you have an encounter with me? Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. This sounds good, doesn't it? I like this. When you call on me, I will answer you. God, you're on my speed dial. If you pull out your iPhone right now, you have a favorite contacts list, right? And you just push that favorite contact and boop, 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 and it goes and you're talking to that person. God is on speed dial. When you pray to me, you'll talk to me, you'll find me. And then it says this in verse 13. You will seek me and you will find me. How do we have an encounter with God? You will seek me and you will find me. You will encounter me. When? See that little word when? Is like an equation right there. I remember in algebra or geometry we learned that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That if a squared equals b squared and b squared equals c squared, then c squared equals a squared. Remember those little equations? Something like that. Is that how it worked? Sure, it does today. That if, no, it was this. If a equals b and b equals c, then a equals c. There we go, now we got it. Squared 2. No. If a equals b and b equals c, then a equals c. That if we do this, then we will get this. If I do A, then B will happen. Parenting tip for a minute. If you say to your children that if this happens, then, or if you do this, then this will occur, make sure that this occurs when you say that this will occur. See, God, who's our ultimate Father, who's the example of who we are, says, if you do this, I will do this. He says, you will find me when? When you seek me with all your heart. When you seek me with all of your heart. And friends, can I tell you, when I read that, it broke me a little bit. See, I can seek after God and I can serve God with all of my body, with all of my time, with all of my effort, with all of my thoughts, and still not be seeking Him with my heart. I read that and it broke me a little bit because we so desperately want to encounter God, and we do a lot of stuff to have it happen. Come on, God, I listened to worship music for like 3 hours today. I should feel you more, right? Come on, how many of you guys have said that? Not, right? Come on, God, I had a really good prayer time with you this morning. Why shouldn't I feel you more? Right? Come on, God, I read my Bible today for like 4 days in a row. Come on, God, I did it. You know what God said? He said this in the book of Malachi. He said, oh, that you would just shut the gates to the temple. Just stop doing what you're doing because your actions are with me, but your heart is far from me. See, we can do all the right things, but if we have the wrong heart about it, we're still missing it. And then we say, God, where's my encounter? And God says, your heart's not in this. You're still building up the box that you think I should live in that's captivating you, but your heart's not in it. And God's saying, listen, I want your heart more than anything else. I want to be the center of your affection. I want to be the center of your desires. I want to be the first thing that you think about in the morning and the last thing when you wake up. Why? Because if you're thinking about all of the things that are on your schedule that you have to do, that you're worried about, that you're psyching yourself out about, then you're putting your trust in your worry and how you're going to fix it. And you're not putting your trust in me, the God who loves you and will provide for you. You're doing the right things. You're saying the right things. But your heart, where's your heart? See, my greatest desire is to see God move. How many of you guys are with me? To see God do something amazing. You know the problem? My box often decides what I think that amazing should look like. John the Baptist was in prison, and he looked at his disciples and said, "Is Jesus really the Messiah?" You know what Jesus said? Go back and tell him that you're seeing the lame healed, or the sick healed, and the dead coming back to life again. You're seeing the lame walk and the blind see, and ask him if aren't these the signs that he's supposed to be seeing? See, John the Baptist even began to build a box of this is how it's supposed to look like, and I don't know if maybe I thought we were supposed to be doing something different, Jesus. See, today, friends, God is in the business of just absolutely destroying. This is good super glue. Destroying the box that he made, that we made. God is in the business of taking this box and just tearing it apart, piece by piece by piece. Why? Because now when it's apart, there's a light that begins to shine in our lives, and it's not clouded over by the things that we've put in our lives. God's desire is to have an encounter with us to tear the box down that we've built. God's desire is to move in our lives so that he can tear the box down that we've built around our hearts. So how do we do it? Seek God with your whole heart. You know the really hard part about that? There's no scale for it. It's March, and for many of us, we just got through our maybe New Year's cleanse or our New Year's diet, or maybe we're still going strong and in the months of January and February, and hopefully now, you're trying to get in summer shape, right? And you could step on that scale and you could see, oh, it went down, that's awesome. Oh, it went up. I shouldn't have had that extra bowl of ice cream, right? We can see on the scale what happens, that there's a relationship, that there's a correlation. The problem is with our heart, I can't say, well, if you do boom, 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 then you're, because it doesn't work that way. You know your heart. You know what's in your heart. See, friends, my greatest desire isn't to see the church grow. My greatest desire is to see God move. My greatest desire isn't to see the church grow. My greatest desire is to see God move. Why? Because I know that if God moves, then everything else will be added unto us. My greatest desire isn't to see these seats filled for Easter. You know what my greatest desire is? To see you encounter the power of a loving God. Because every person in this book who encountered God it wrecked them. It ruined them. We'll talk about that next week. Every person in the Bible, every story that you see, they had an encounter with God. Their lives were never the same, and they turned their world upside down. But as long as they tried to build their box around what they thought their encounter should look like, as long as they tried to keep doing what they wanted to do and just do it their way, guess what? They were in for a bad road of it. Look at your neighbor and say, God cares about your heart. Guys, God cares about your heart. Does that mean that we still don't need people to make coffee and to welcome people in and to work it? No. Work with kids and to run that? No. Didn't Yuri do an awesome job painting the back kids' room this week? See, guys, there's still stuff that we do, but we don't do it out of I've got to do it. We do it out of a heart that's encountered God.